Just a warning, quick disclaimer, this video does not exist to encourage or discourage any legal or illegal drug use. It is important that you do your own research on both your local laws and how a drug will affect you before deciding to take any substance, legal or illegal. Thank you and enjoy the video. This video is probably the hardest video I've ever made so far, simply because of the lack of research on both dyspraxia and cannabis. I had to use a lot of personal experience from both myself and some Reddit users and another Reddit thread I found talking about this topic, as well as some forums, and basically it's all subjective. So this video is due to be revised as soon as more research comes out. And I will definitely make a follow-up video if we ever do get more research on cannabis with dyspraxia. But for the time being, it's important to remember that a lot of this video is based on both my personal effects as well as the subjective effects of all the users that I've gathered the info on personal experiences on. For anyone who doesn't know what dyspraxia is, I'm going to refer to the Living with Dyspraxia video I made, simply because I don't want this video to be an hour long on me both explaining what dyspraxia is and its effects as well as cannabis's effects, because that would make this video take forever. And if you're curious about how cannabis affects the brain and the body, well, there's about 1.5 million YouTube videos and, health channels and shit about that, so feel free to check that out before watching this video too. So let's get to the point. Do you get higher on cannabis by having dyspraxia? The answer for the vast majority of the comments I've seen, as well as myself, is yes, to some extent. I feel like a big part of this is just the fact of the impaired coordination and the impaired balance in general that comes with dyspraxia being amplified by the cannabis. Now, it seems to me that cannabis in general tends to enhance whatever your focus is on, and so whatever your thought process is as well. And due to you already having these cognitive deficiencies and balance deficiencies, all cannabis is going to do is add on to them, which can cause a more intense high. Now, I don't know about anyone else, and I have also had an experience using dissociatives in the past, so this may be a factor in my own personal experience. It may not be a dyspraxia thing, but I've also found that the visuals from cannabis tend to be more intense and more pronounced for me than with other people who I smoke with. Also, it's important to remember I am smoking a cigarette. There's no cannabis use portrayed in this video, seriously. I gotta follow the YouTube community guidelines even though I'm not monetized, because that's the world we live in today. Another big talking point when it comes to cannabis with dyspraxia is anxiety. And anxiety is something that almost everybody feels, especially regular cannabis users. I find that a lot of the cannabis use that causes anxiety is using cannabis in social situations. And that could just be whatever scenario you're in, whether you're with somebody who you don't trust, or you're at work, or just smoking at a time that you really shouldn't be smoking. While a lot of my channel is based on helping people with dyspraxia and explaining my own experiences, you don't really have to have dyspraxia to have cannabis paranoia, unfortunately. And while cannabis can greatly help with people with anxiety, if you have the right strain and do it at the right times, it can also purvey anxiety in the wrong situations or with the wrong strains. It's important that when consuming cannabis for anxiety, or even just for dyspraxia-related ailments or disorders, it is important that you get a high CBD strain more than a high THC strain. Now, yeah, this means you won't get as high as you may want to, but it'll also ease the anxiety while still maintaining a high. If you are suffering cannabis paranoia, whether it be right now watching this video or in the future, I find there are two things that tend to help me. For one thing, ibuprofen or any NSAID really will immediately kill your high, but will also maintain the effects. I've also heard a lot about black peppercorn and all these other folk remedies. And while that has helped some people, I find that ibuprofen, for the vast majority of people, will immediately kill a high, but also allow you to keep the medical benefits of cannabis as well. And that's the important thing when looking at this video as well, is just the fact that although cannabis is a good thing and can help people medically, it is not an end-all solution for everybody, and everybody gets affected by everything differently. And so when it comes to using cannabis, I don't think everyone should smoke weed, and I sure as heck don't think you should smoke weed every day. But before I make this one long tangent, and if you guys do want my personal opinions on weed in general, I'll definitely make a follow-up video. Just mention it in the comments and I'll talk about it. But this video is meant to be about dyspraxia. Now, the stereotype of the lazy stoner is actually a stereotype for a reason. Because in people who are just naturally lazy, or people who tend to forget things, like people with dyspraxia, cannabis will cause these things to become more pronounced. It may not be the best idea to consume cannabis if you are planning on being productive within the next 2 to 4 hours. And so when it comes to recreational usage or even medical usage, I would heavily suggest using cannabis on a day off, when you're guaranteed to have time off at least 2 to 4 hours where you're not going to have to be doing anything. And also just in a situation where you're not required to do anything in general. If you do take cannabis medically, and you legitimately do need it for a problem that does affect you while you're being productive or having to work, it's important that you remember you don't have to smoke that whole bowl. You don't have to smoke that whole blunt, and you don't have to smoke that whole joint. Microdosing is key, and usually it only takes like a hit or two to get enough relief from whatever nausea or pain you're in without getting substantially high. You also tend to save a lot of weed not smoking it all at once, and another big part of the anxiety in general just comes from taking too much cannabis at once. As stated earlier, it usually doesn't take as much cannabis to get someone with dyspraxia high as the average population. And so if you consume too much cannabis, which for you may just be significantly less than the people you're smoking with, it can really ruin your time. And you could end up just paranoid and anxious the whole time. Your brain can only take so much THC at once, and with dyspraxia, due to cognitive imbalance deficiencies, your cannabis level for tolerance in general is just that much lower, especially if you're not a regular user of cannabis. At the end of the day, would I suggest cannabis use to everybody with dyspraxia? No. I would say if you're looking to just have fun on your day off, or you have a legitimate medical issue that would require the use of cannabis, whether it be appetite loss or nausea or whatever, to make sure you watch your doses, do your research, and make sure you know what you're doing. This is the same with using just about any recreational or medical substance. It's always important to do your research and know how it's going to affect you. And this is the same with even prescribed medicine or even ibuprofen. You always read the label on the back for your usage, and well, with a drug like cannabis, you should really do the same too. I can only talk from personal experience, and that's the same with just about anybody when it comes to a topic like cannabis. Every substance affects everybody differently. We all have individual brain chemistry. It's the same with dyspraxia too. I can only talk about my own personal experience. And that's the key, is experience. The only way you'll know is from experience. Now, am I saying you should go out and try cannabis just so you can experience it? No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying if you do your research and you decide that cannabis and its associated risks and benefits are what you seek, that you start with a low dose, all right? And especially start smoking. Don't do edibles right away because edibles are ridiculously strong. And yeah, that's a story for another time. Take a hit, wait 5 minutes, see how you feel. If you're not feeling pleasant enough or you're just not feeling it, take another hit and repeat until you are satisfied. Cannabis takes ridiculously long to kick in, especially the edible form, but when smoked, it can be relatively rewarding, either recreationally or medically. It's just a matter of knowing what you're doing and how you do it. And it can also be a negative to both health and all these other things. So keep that in mind. And if you don't like cannabis, don't feel pressured to use cannabis. Cannabis is not the best thing that anyone with dyspraxia could take. It's not going to help your dyspraxia, and it may even hinder your dyspraxia. So please, be cautious and be safe. Have a good one, everyone. I'll have another video up next week.